Here we go. Now we're talking. We are talking 5-step formula to boost profitability during COVID. And this is a 5-step process that we've developed. And we are here from Changing Paces, and this is a quote that we picked up. We should never assume that accessibility is someone else's problem. In the end, we're all in this together. Accessibility is a basic human right and it benefits everyone. That would be Eve Anderson, Director of Accessibility at Google, that said that. And we are thrilled. When I say the collective we, I mean we at Changing Paces, but I also mean we as in people with disabilities, because I am definitely on that list. And let me tell you a little bit more. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me during this difficult time. We've all been impacted by this global pandemic one way or another, but the reality for most business owners is that revenue is either significantly down or dried up completely, and we're not sure how long the recovery from COVID is going to take. With most businesses moving online for survival, there's been a huge learning curve for many. But for those of us who've been working online for decades already, the adjustment has been far more doable than most. While the crisis has been devastating for the tens of thousands of families, or maybe hundreds at this point, I didn't check the stats this morning, that have lost senior members, I'm grateful to say there's been much good that's come out of it as well. The new reality that stands out the most for me is how people everywhere are reaching out to each other, to their fellow man, to provide support. That alone has given me a warm feeling that I can't even begin to describe, but there's a deeper sense of gratitude that comes with it as well for me. So now that you've seen my inner heart, my name is Trish Robichaud, and I'm a work-life inclusion coach, accessibility compliance consultant, and a motivational speaker, and I live and work with multiple disabilities. I was diagnosed with major depression in my 20s, multiple sclerosis in my 30s, significant heart disease that required a quadruple bypass in my 40s, and bipolar disorder in my 50s. In my 30s, I actually lost my job and a 12-year career as a result of the sick time I'd racked up leading up to my MS diagnosis. Since then, I've made it my mission to bring disability out of the darkness and create a more welcoming world for people of all abilities. Thankfully, I'm blessed to be quite resilient, an eternal optimist, and a die-hard problem solver with an affinity for finding or creating elusive solutions. This has served me very well personally and as a coach. I've now been coaching people with disabilities on work, life, and business issues for almost 25 years, and training and consulting for organizations about how to interact with clients, customers, and employees with disabilities for 15 years. I'm passionate about my work and my clients' success, and I am living proof that living with disability does not preclude the achievement of professional fulfillment. This webinar is intended to challenge preconceived notions and unconscious biases. It's meant to be highly engaging, so please feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat box, either during or at the end of the presentation. I will answer them all after the webinar. The chat box can be found by hovering over the More button at the right end of the button bar at the bottom of the Zoom window. To be transparent up front, while I will be giving you a takeaway today that you can implement right away, at the end of this webinar, I'm going to make you an offer to provide you with the help you need to accomplish this 5-step process faster and easier than you'd ever manage on your own. A little housekeeping before we start. So you know, this webinar is being recorded for playback at your convenience. You'll receive a link to our YouTube channel by email tomorrow. The playback should be at the top of the playlist. And when I finish the presentation, please hang out for a moment so that we can say goodbye. Also, if my video feed is covering something on the screen that you want to see, just click on my face and drag me elsewhere. All right. Our objective here today is to share untapped profitability with you, our 5-step process for increasing profits by hiring people with disabilities. And those 5 steps to increasing profit are: number 1, embracing the benefits of disability at work. Step 2, building an inclusive company culture. Step 3, creating an accessible workplace. Step 4, providing accessible customer service. And step 5, that's the employing of actual people with disabilities. Now let's break that down. Step number 1, embracing the benefits of disability at work includes looking at the human potential of people with disabilities, the financial benefits of employing people with disabilities, and the cultural shift that will happen when you do. Please note that each of these 5 steps I'm going to cover in this webinar require a series of initiatives to be undertaken to fulfill full inclusion and compliance with disability legislation. But for the sake of brevity, I'm going to keep the coverage of these initiatives to a minimum. It's the 5 steps themselves that are the main takeaway here. Of course, the complete toolkit, best practices, and sample forms will be included in the program I'm going to tell you about at the end. Sorry, moisturizing my mouth so that I can talk more. All right, so first we look at the solution from our current skilled labor shortage. Of course, these statistics are pre-COVID. We actually don't have statistics yet that are post-COVID, but pre-COVID, Stats Canada tells us here that in Ontario, the employment rate for people with disabilities is only 58% compared to 81% for people without disabilities. And those numbers are quite representative of statistics in other countries as well, if not worse. Okay, but they are at least, it's like there's twice as many people without disabilities employed as there are people with disabilities. With 2.6 million Ontarians living with a disability, that roughly a quarter of the population, because 1 in 4 people with disabilities have a disability in Ontario, and 50% of those having post-secondary education credentials, we have an enormous pool of untapped talent here, over 500,000 in fact. And as I said, those numbers, those percentages are reflective in other countries as well. Now, in terms of human potential, this ad features Amy Mullins, a Paralympic athlete, actor, model, and advocate. The campaign was run by fashion house Kenneth Cole with the tagline, 25 years of non-uniform thinking. Amy was born with a medical condition requiring amputation of both her lower legs at 1 year old. This first photo, shows her high fashion posture wearing 2 dress prostheses. Prosthetic devices have improved dramatically in recent decades so that wearers are no longer disabled, but rather, like Amy, can be capable of running competitively in world-class events. We share Amy's story with you to illustrate the human potential behind one woman who has been seemingly disabled since near birth. Given the motivation and the right technology or other adaptations or treatments, anything is possible for people with disabilities now. We all have the human potential to make a world a better place. So why are companies holding back? Why do they hold back on hiring people with disabilities? Many companies avoid targeting active inclusion of people with disabilities because they incorrectly assume that it will cost them more money than the average employee, or they assume that it will require more complex expertise. But multiple studies show that this is not the case. Specific expertise or training is simply not required. Yet still, many people will not hire out of ignorance and fear. The reality is that nearly 60% of accommodations cost nothing, while the rest average around $500 per person. Being mindful of accommodation from the start can also help companies avoid extra costs. For example, consider adding accessibility features right away and making accessible work hours and diversity training part of your workplace culture. Because everyone is an individual and has unique needs, rather than assuming that they'll need complex accommodations, the best way to serve any of your employees is simply to ask what they need from you and deliver on those needs to the best of your ability. Be a leader in your organization and encourage people to reconsider outdated processes and thinking. Sometimes there's an unrecognized bias amongst hiring managers. Their jobs will not be any harder if they hire someone who works a little differently. On the contrary, there are actually a number of clear benefits. In fact, a 2017 study by Deloitte shows that diverse and inclusive workplaces are 2 times more likely to meet or exceed financial targets, 6 times more likely to be innovative, and 6 times more likely to effectively anticipate change. In terms of key financial benefits, a recent 4-year study by Accenture found that companies that fully embrace disability inclusion had 28% higher revenue, double the net income, and a 30% higher profit margin than those that didn't. This makes disability in the workplace a huge advantage for businesses. Can you really afford to leave that much cash on the table? Who could? Now let's take a closer look at those numbers and crunch them for ourselves. For example, any non-inclusive business, or let's say business A, for example, let's say they have a revenue of $500,000 and they have a cost of goods sold of $300,000. That would leave a profit margin of $200,000 or 40%. Okay, now let's look at the potential for a fully inclusive business. Let's call them business B. If their revenue were 28% higher, as stated in the last study that I spoke about, than business A, that would make $640,000 in revenue and $140,000 as their revenue growth as a result of going inclusive. From another perspective, if we took the 30% higher profit margin, also stated in the last study, over business A, that would make a 52% profit margin for business B, or 52% of 640 being $332,800, which is an increase, of course, of $132,800 over the business that business B brought in. It seems that including people with disabilities in your business model should be well worth the return on investment, wouldn't you say? We'll get there. We've talked about the financial benefits of hiring people with disabilities, but what about a company's cultural benefits? And why in the world does hiring people with disabilities increase profitability anyway? First, turnover is lower because people with disabilities tend to stay with a company because it's hard to find a job when you have a disability, so we are far less likely to quit when faced with challenges. Every business owner knows the financial and productivity costs connected with having to replace yet another employee who's given you their notice. Productivity can increase because people with disabilities often have knowledge of assistive technology and other innovations. We're used to finding new ways of doing things. We also make good team players as we're accustomed to collaborating with others to see that our needs are met. Other benefits of hiring people with disabilities include improvements in profitability, like attendance and punctuality, improved employee morale and positive company image, and lower health and safety costs. Why? Why are health and safety costs lower, you might wonder? Because people with disabilities, generally speaking, are less likely to take risks. Organizations that are inclusive see a competitive advantage, as in diverse customers, customer and employee loyalty and satisfaction, innovation, elevated work ethics, inclusive work culture, and ability awareness. Secondary benefits for people with disabilities include improved quality of life and income, enhanced self-confidence, expanded social network, and a sense of community. Step 2 in our 5-step formula is building an inclusive company culture, which involves, among other things, policy development, accessibility planning, and compliance reporting, making websites accessible, and creating accessible documents and communications. With our recent move to working online from home because of COVID, businesses are now more prepared than ever to accommodate people with disabilities. What was once seen as an undue hardship, setting up employees to work virtually, is now regarded as business as usual. This is just one example of how learning to accommodate employees with disabilities can ultimately benefit everyone in the organization. In terms of policy development, planning, and reporting, all organizations are required to develop, implement, and maintain accessibility policies and accessible customer service policies specifically. In addition, large organizations with 50 or more employees are required to document their accessibility and customer service policies and post them on their website. They're required to develop a statement of organizational commitment to those policies, and they're required to develop, implement, maintain, and document a multi-year accessibility plan. In terms of reporting, large organizations are required to report the status of their legislative compliance across the board, while only those with 20 to 49 employees just have to report on the customer service standard requirements. As business owners, you have the flexibility to create policies and practices that best fit your existing work culture and business practices, as long as they meet the needs of people with disabilities. While small businesses may not be required to document their accessible customer service policies, it's important that your policy is clearly defined and communicated to staff, even if it's not on paper. When we look at making websites accessible, there are generally 3 different approaches that firms take. The first is traditional code remediation, which is the most expensive and takes the longest, but it is regarded the highest amongst highest in quality amongst people who use screen readers who have visual disabilities. Next, we have overlays, which are the least expensive and will be done the quickest. And finally, we have hybrids, which are in the middle on money and time for implementation. Each has its pros and cons, and website accessibility and web content accessibility is required for large organizations in Ontario by January 1, 2021, the end of this year. Small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, while they are not required to have an accessible website at this stage of the legislative development, but given that those small and medium-sized businesses make up the vast majority of businesses in Ontario and in other jurisdictions as well. That makes up for a lot of inaccessible websites. So in honor of people with disabilities across the globe and best practices for inclusive companies, we've uncovered a solution. Accessibility. Introducing Accessibility, which is an overlay with an AI or artificial intelligence working at the back end. In fact, it's the first web accessibility platform on the planet to use AI to modify inaccessible coding on the fly. This is the interface that just popped up. It provides you features that change the font size, the size of the font, the font type, the size of the font, the color theme, as well as many, many other functions. It's WCAG 2.1 and legislative compliant, and it's automatic, simple, and affordable. It installs with one string of code on your website and takes you into compliance within 48 hours. Accessibility starts at $4.90 per year for websites up to 1,000 pages, and PDFs, audios, and video remediation are priced extra. Then the software rescans the site every 24 hours to spot recent updates to the content, and it comes with its own built-in website accessibility statement. When creating any kind of digital content or communications, there are a number of key functions that must be used in order to ensure your content is accessible. These key traits required, they're required for, these key traits required for accessibility are the same regardless of whether your document is in HTML or Microsoft Word or Adobe or any other document format. Starting at the top, we're talking about using heading styles. Okay, so instead of selecting your text for your heading and bolding it or making it larger manually, select the text and use the style function to choose your title or heading function, to name it as a heading. That's vital for accessibility. Same thing with building lists. When you build lists, always use bullets because you're telling the software that it's a bulleted list, and that software can then tell a screen reader user that you have created a list of bullets and what that means. Use meaningful hyperlinks, I should say. If instead of selecting just click here and creating a hyperlink, actually select descriptive text. For example, click here to download the file. Use all of that text. Next, we have using alt text for images. That means creating a description for each image and attaching it as an alternative text to that document, to that image. We also have to identify our language within the application. And using tables wisely, we have to make sure we use titles both in columns and in rows. And finally, we have to understand how to export from one format to another. Step number 3, creating an accessible workplace includes, but is not limited to, your office, store, or facility accessibility, your physical accessibility, and the physical accessibility of self-service kiosks. In terms of your office, your store, or your facility accessibility, in addition to the building codes which require accessibility, accessibility must be provided in the following areas. Those that are included but are not limited to these examples. Okay, we're talking about entrances and exits, restrooms, accessible parking spaces, service counters, making waiting areas accessible, and making sure conference rooms and common workspaces are accessible. Something to note here is that because of COVID, we're currently taking all kinds of actions to make interacting accessible and safe for everyone. The example that comes to mind for me is how wherever you go for essential services, well, and more than essential services now, you find tape or labels on the floor marking social distances or directions to help people see where they need to go. Wouldn't that be beneficial in non-crisis times to show people where the stairs are or where the washrooms are? And this is just another example of how a strategy to accommodate people with, in this case, illness, around illness, as opposed to disability, these strategies can benefit everyone. Accessibility does. In terms of self-serve kiosks, while the government and the public sector are required to incorporate accessibility features when buying and setting up self-serve kiosks, large and small businesses and nonprofits, on the other hand, they only have to have regard for accessibility for persons with disabilities when setting up these systems. A kiosk is can also be an interactive electronic terminal, including a point-of-sale device intended for public use that allows users to use one or more services or products or both. Step number 4, providing accessible customer service. Training your staff on customer service, on making customer service accessible to people with disabilities. Let me start this slide again. Providing accessible customer service involves training your staff on making customer service accessible to people with disabilities. It involves creating an accessible feedback system and making it accessible to the public, and welcoming and accommodating service animals and support persons. All right. Next, to give you some further illustration on an example of topics to cover when training your staff, I've got a video to show you that was produced by the DC government. And I am trying to grab it right now, and it's not happening. Why is it not happening? Bear with me a moment, folks, and I shall get it on the screen for you. There we go. Copy. And now we're going to paste. And excuse the dog.
You have to try Monday.com. Monday.com is a platform to track.
Past the ad. Sorry, here's the video.
Good morning, Mom. Morning there. And morning, Alice. There's no need to be awkward. Poor Bob. Like so many of us, he just doesn't know how to interact with people with disabilities.
It's pretty easy, really. People with disabilities are people first.
They need the same things that every person needs, like respect.
Good morning, everyone.
Attention! Okay. Maybe we need to be more specific.
The easiest way to show respect is to focus on the person. It's okay. You'll get the hang of it.
One easy way to focus on the person is to watch the person signing and not their interpreter.
Or their companion.
It's really cool that you'd like to help, but do us both a favor and please ask me first. What you think might be helping?
I got you.
Wait, ah! Oh no, might actually not.
If you'd like to offer me help, Let me hold on to your elbow. Don't take mine.
Hey, would you like to take one on?
Sure.
Assistive devices help us to live our lives. They're really important and really personal.
Grabbing them only makes it weird for everyone.
Please only touch our devices and service animals if we've given you permission. And don't take it personally if I ask you not to. Remember that my service animal helps me all the time. Neither of us would like it if we were separated.
Remember, we make our own decisions. We sign documents, vote, volunteer, work, and pay taxes.
We get married.
So don't underestimate me just because I have a great smile.
Just because I'm blind does not mean I'm deaf.
Just because I'm deaf doesn't mean I'm blind.
And just because I use a wheelchair doesn't mean that I can't sweep you off your feet.
So take a deep breath, relax. We don't bite.
Unless we're really hungry.
Hello there, ladies. How are you?
Hello. And if you're not sure what to do, just ask.
Hi. Would you still like to see a menu?
No thanks, but can you please read it to me?
Sure, definitely.
Just treat us the way you would want to be treated, and we'll all be okay.
Morning. Good morning. Good morning, Alice.
Right.
Awkward no more. Nice job, Bob. Go forth and be human. There's no need to be awkward.
Awesome.
Hey, my name is Tom. I'm based in...
Yeah, and goodbye, Tom. And here we go. Back to our presentation. There we go. So thank you to the DC government. That was a awesome video. And now we're talking about step number 5, employing people with disabilities. And employing people with disabilities includes quite a fair bit more than the following, but we're going to give you the taste, an overview, a high-end overview here. We're talking about encouraging self-identification at work for people with disabilities, and we're talking about recruiting and interviewing and retaining and advancing people with disabilities. Again, there's a lot more to it, but this is the gist, and I'm going to, again, I have to grab a link because I have a video for you. And here we go. And there's a copy, and there's a paste. Here we go. Let's hope it doesn't stop. Oh, there we go. No ad this time.
Been with PepsiCo for coming up on 5 years now. Work on the fountain line, do everything from side graphics, new valves, new lines, hoses, make it the beautiful machines that you guys see when you go have dinner at night with your family.
I'm an administrator, and I make sure the building runs, pay all the bills and everything like that. I've been here 22 years. I'm on the downward fall now. I'm going towards the 40 years.
I've been with Frito-Lay for about 13 years. I'm a pre-pick picker, and I basically work on the module. You have to be quick. You have so many bags you need to pick. You have lots of orders, and you need to make sure you get them all.
The normal thing for me is I go out there on the floor, see how my guys are doing, see how everything's going, and make sure my guys have their work orders and they know what they're doing for the day.
I am an HR specialist, and so what I do is I design surveys to really get at what our business leaders want to know about our employees and how they're feeling.
I've been with PepsiCo almost 9 years, and I am currently in supply chain finance, supporting the warehouse function.
I'm the senior market director in the state of Indiana. I've been with the company for 34 years.
I have a disability called achromatopsia. I'm considered blind. I'm really susceptible to light. I can't see very well in light either. So, yes, it is, but it's fine. I can't even see your face.
Sensitive aneurysm, hearing loss.
I have multiple sclerosis.
Traumatic brain injury.
I'm a type 1 diabetic.
Our son has Angelman syndrome.
I'm a mother of a child with dyslexia. What they're looking at may not be what they think that they see, that there's something that goes on underneath all of our skins.
He's saying hi to you. He likes you.
Some of the challenge is the unknown. The atypical days are the days when he has seizure episodes. That's a horrible situation for any family to deal with or person to deal with, because it's really the edge of death.
I found out that I had my disability when I was 5. My mom sat me down. She said, I want to let you know that you have a disease called achromatopsia. You can't see, you're blind, and you can't see color. I told her, no, you're wrong. And she told me, well, what color is this? And slides me over a toy. I told her it's green. No, it's not, Candace, it's not green.
I don't have the coordination or the balance. It's more of a neurological disease, like an extension cord plugs into the wall, which would be my brain. The cord might be frayed, and you won't get a great connection. My connection doesn't go towards my body.
I was about 6 or 7 years old when I came down with scarlet fever. I've lost approximately about 50% of my hearing. At this point, I'm down to maybe like 30% of my hearing.
I was in 2nd grade and I started to cry during a math test because I could no longer see the numbers on the page. They were blurry. And that was because my blood sugar was so high that it began to put pressure on my optic nerves, and so it was messing with my vision. Sometimes having a disability, especially an invisible disability, you can sort of feel isolated and like no one knows what you're going through every day.
In 2002, I joined the military, and during one of my deployments while I was in the Army, I was injured, got hit in the head. My back is in all kinds of shambles, and I do have PTSD from that incident. The support that we have received from PepsiCo is vast and comprehensive.
When I first applied for this role with PepsiCo, first thing out of my mouth was, I said, are you sure that you want to put a territory in the hands of someone that cannot pick up a phone and put a fire out like that? And my boss says, we'll make it work. We'll figure it out.
They're going to help you. You need things printed bigger. You need things signed to, whatever it may be that you need. It's going to be there for you. And no one's going to hold it against you if you need a little bit of help.
Disabled employees and caregivers are welcome and are vital to our business and future growth. Self-identification is important so the company knows how well we're serving our associates with disabilities. 1 in 5 working-age Americans has a condition that qualifies as a disability. Disability reaches all ages, all races, and your gender doesn't matter. The term disability includes a vast array of conditions. 70% or more hidden disabilities, meaning these conditions are not visible to others.
I was absolutely self-identified. There's absolutely no reason for you not to. I acknowledge my disability as part of who I am.
A little bit of a weight was lifted the day that I did tell my manager for the first time. It was great to feel like she knew who I was as an employee.
Make sure that there's very open dialogue and transparency. Let them know that, even though you do have a disability, you still can be productive and you can be part of the team and help get things done from day to day.
Associates with disabilities, like any of our associates, are integral members of our big PepsiCo family. We take pride that diversity is in our DNA. That's the PepsiCo way, and it's how each and every associate is treated.
I love my job.
I mean, I wouldn't want to work anywhere else. They don't treat me any different. They treat me as just Brian.
It's about bringing my full self to work.
It's huge to have a voice. You're the only you.
To all our associates with disabilities and anyone who is a caregiver for a person with a disability, I simply want to say this: you belong here at PepsiCo. You make us a faster, stronger, better company. So please, take the time to self-identify through the My HR system and we will continue doing everything we can to support you and encourage more people with disabilities to join the PepsiCo team.
Excellent. Beautiful video by PepsiCo. Really great stuff. Thank you to PepsiCo. Okay, let's do a review. My objective today was to share with you our untapped profitability program, a 5-step process for increasing profits by hiring people with disabilities. And those steps include, number 1, embracing the benefits of disability at work. Number 2, building an inclusive company culture. 3, creating an accessible workplace. 4, providing accessible customer service. And 5, employing people with disabilities. Now that you've got an idea what's involved with the legislative compliance covered by these 5 steps, how would you like to implement untapped profitability with a far greater ease than you would on your own? What if I told you that with the support of my legislative and accessibility expertise, you could have a significant portion of your legal requirements fulfilled within 90 days, and you should see a return on your investment within 12 to 24 months, post-COVID that is. One of our featured clients is Sunwing Airlines, and this is what they had to say about us. We were taken on by Sunwing to develop an accessible training program for their employees to teach their staff how to provide accessible customer service to travelers with disabilities during the air travel experience. It was a wonderful experience working with Sunwing, and they were thrilled with their outcome. And fabulous feedback from Sunwing. Thank you so much, Sunwing. And that brings us to my offer for today, the Untapped Profitability Program. Is your small to medium-sized business fully compliant with disability legislation, do you think? I've shown you here today that the benefits of taking that step far outweigh the costs. Compliance can be easier and more compelling than you think. In 10 weekly webinars, we'll walk you through learning and implementing our 5-step compliance process, from how to recruit and hire people with disabilities to celebrating an inclusive company culture and enjoying increased profitability. It starts on September 16th and runs to November 18th. As I've shared with you today, hiring people with disabilities has been proven to reduce turnover, increase customer and employee loyalty, reduce health and safety costs, double net income, and boost profit margins by 30%. We crunched those numbers with a sample annual revenue of $500,000 to start. We ended up with an additional $132,000 in gross profit. Can you afford to ignore that potential increase in earnings? Consider those numbers against your current revenue and see if your potential growth could be a healthy return on your investment of the cost of the program, $8,000, or 3 payments of $2,800. Now is the time to get started for the sake of your bottom line. The sooner, the better. So what's included in the program? With this program, you'll get access to 10 training and implementation videos, 60 to 90 minutes apiece. You will get video recordings of each of the 10 sessions for PC or mobile playback. You will get audio recordings of each of the 10 sessions for listen and learn sessions on the go. You will get transcripts for each of the 5 steps, assignments for each of the 5 steps, and a copy of my slide deck or my PowerPoint for each of the 5 steps. What are you going to take away, do you think? Let me see. The takeaways from this program are extensive, but here's a short list. You will take away clear strategies for achieving compliance with disability legislation. You will walk away with templates for every document you need to facilitate accessible employment practices. You will achieve a new level of appreciation for customer service needs of people with different types of disabilities. You'll walk away with resources for finding job candidates with disabilities. You'll have the know-how and confidence to fully engage with employees and customers with disabilities. You'll have our 5-step formula for increasing profitability and the comfort level of knowing when disability-related issues arise, you have an expert on your team. What else? What else, you might be wondering? Well, we've got a couple of bonuses for you. What else indeed? As our first bonus, we're going to set up your website to be fully accessible. According to WCAG, the global standards for website accessibility, Accessibility, our AI-powered website accessibility overlay is automatic, simple, and affordable. Your first year's annual cost for the site of up to 1,000 pages is included. And finally, there's the optional super bonus. We're going to provide further group implementation coaching for 3 months after the new year to provide you with support on any disability or accessibility related issues. Those sessions will be every other week from January 6th to March 31st. All that for one payment of $8,000 or 3 payments of $2,800. I encourage you to measure the cost of the program against the value of saving on non-compliance penalty fees of up to $100,000 a day. I encourage you not to take that unnecessary risk. But wait, there's one more thing I want to do for you just because we're all struggling during this history-making global pandemic. We've created a COVID-19 discount. If you act now, or by the end of the day, July 31st, we're offering a 25% or $2,000 discount on the program price. Oh, plus those extra $3, just for your attendance today, bringing your investment down to $59.97 or 3 payments of $20.97 each. Imagine a boost in income, disability legislation compliance, and making a social impact. It's a win-win-win. How can you argue with that? And here we have some feedback from another of our featured clients, Accenture, a global leader in business management and organizational development and consulting. Accenture was looking for an unusual event to celebrate the International Day of People with Disabilities, and we put together a workshop talking about barriers to inclusion and strategies for accommodating those barriers, and we did that in a game show format. It was so much fun. Everybody had a blast. It was a good time. Well, everybody learned at the same time. Thank you very much for your feedback, Accenture. And thank you for joining me today for this Out of the Ordinary webinar that has huge potential for your business. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation and my delivery. Again, if you're interested in our Untapped Profitability program and increasing profit by hiring people with disabilities, be sure to email me by end of business day on July 31st to take advantage of the $2,000 discount offer. If you'd like to chat with me before you make a decision, please feel free to call me and we'll have that conversation. I look forward to hearing from you so we can plan that win-win-win for your business together. In the interim, stay home, stay safe, and God bless. Thanks again.